Hello and welcome to this DW News live stream on the Iran war. I'm Biresh Banerjee.
And I'm Gerhard Elfers. I'll be bringing your questions and comments into the live stream today.
And today on the stream, we want to talk about how Iran is responding to the attacks against it, what experts are calling an asymmetric response using drones and cyber warfare. But first, breaking news coming in. Israel is claiming that it's killed Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani. We have images of him from just a few days ago. Now, the images we want to show are from a pro-government demonstration in Tehran. I believe they are from the 13th of March. Those are the latest pictures that we could find of Ali Larijani, the top security official of Iran that Israel is claiming has been killed. And that claim has been made by Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, who said in a statement that Larijani and the head of the Revolutionary Guard's Basij militia, General Gholam Reza Soleimani, were eliminated last night. We can hear more from Katz.
Ali Larijani, along with the head of the Basij, Iran's central repression apparatus, Soleimani, who was responsible for the massacres of protesters, were eliminated last night. They've joined the head of the annihilation program, Khamenei, along with all those eliminated from the axis of evil in the depths of hell.
Strong words there, but let's get more now from Kamran Matin. He's an associate professor of international relations at the University of Sussex. He joins us now on the line. Thank you for making the time, Professor Matin. I mean, it's hard to get information out of Iran. That has been a constant struggle for us here at DW News as well. But how credible would you say the Israeli claims are?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me on the show. So far, what I have seen is that outlets close to IRGC have published a handwritten message from Larijani, presumably to counter the news from Israel that Ali Larijani has been assassinated. Now, given that they have published only a written, handwritten message rather than a video clip showing him alive, one can imagine that at least he might have been injured in a way that he cannot speak in public. Otherwise, surely they would produce a video of him to counter or to deny that he's been killed.
It's interesting you mentioned that X post, because Gerhard has that ready on his computer.
I wonder whether we can show this.
Bring that up just so that people have a reference point as to what
it is indeed this handwritten statement where he refers to the warriors of the Islamic Republic of the Iranian Navy. It's on the occasion of the funeral of those killed in the attacks on Iranian ships, that their memory will always be in the hearts of the nation. And the martyrdom will establish the foundation of the Islamic Republic Army in the structure of the armed forces for many years. And he thanks God Almighty to grant these dear martyrs the highest ranks.
That is a handwritten note that we are talking about. Again, nobody can at the moment say if this is in fact from Ali Larijani. But I just wondered, to the point that you were making, Professor Matin, that one can make assumptions from this post, because if that were the case, one can also make assumptions about the fate of Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, can't we? Because he has also not really been seen in public delivering any remarks. In fact, his remarks were being read out by a news anchor aligned to the state media. So what does that tell us at the moment about the Iranian leadership? So is the security leadership decapitated, the main leadership decapitated? Is that what's happened? Is it a state of turmoil currently in the Iranian leadership?
Yes, before addressing that question, just to add that the handwritten message of Larijani seems to be related to an occasion which is before last night reported attacks on Larijani. So even if this was correct, this doesn't necessarily mean that he's alive, because it's been written before last night. In terms of your question, well, clearly Iranian intelligence apparatus is completely in tatters, and Israel has infiltrated at the highest and the most comprehensive way one could imagine, which is in many ways is unprecedented in modern history of warfare anywhere in the world. So many, if not most of Iran's most senior leaders have been eliminated, killed, and even their replacements have been killed. And with Larijani gone, there is really very, very few people left who have a pedigree comparable in terms of being involved in the 1979 revolution, having interaction with Khamenei and Khomeini. I can only think of Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, and Pezeshkian, the President, the head of Judiciary, Ejei, and a few others. So indeed, I mean, the blows delivered to Iranian leadership is quite remarkable and incredible by any standards. But regarding Mojtaba Khamenei, at least, I don't think Israel has, with a similar level of confidence, announced his demise. And the reports we get is that he's been transferred to Russia, to Moscow, for medical treatment because he was injured in the attack which killed his father. In case of Larijani, I guess we have to wait a little bit longer to see what else Iranian state media are producing to confirm him not being assassinated.
Also, the Russian TASS state news agency has denied, just a few moments ago, denied a report that Khamenei is receiving medical treatment in Russia that was reported, but now denied by Iran's ambassador to Russia. Piyush.
I mean, I suppose the thing with all of this is the truth of the matter is in the seeing. The seeing is believing, and we haven't seen Mojtaba Khamenei, at least in public. So I guess until that happens, there will be lots of assumptions being made. But just coming back to the presumed death of Larijani, I mean, the Israelis sound very confident. But assuming that Larijani has indeed been eliminated, Professor Matin, how would that impact Iran's efforts to retaliate against the US and Israeli strikes at the moment?
I don't think it has an impact or immediate impact on the military side of Iranian operation, because Iran has activated what it describes as a mosaic strategy, whereby command and control are decentralized and distributed among 30-odd centers where the military commanders have some level of autonomy. I think Larijani's significance really lies in the political terms, in political side of aspect of his presence in the Islamic Republic. He has been one of the really most influential figures within Islamic Republic, occupying some of the highest offices in the Republic, from Speaker of Parliament to membership of the Expediency Discernment Council, which is the highest authority in terms of designing Iran's overall strategy. He's was the chairman of National Security Council. He was a confidant of Ayatollah Khamenei. He was a senior IRGC commander and therefore very close to the elite leadership of IRGC. And he also, we have to remember, comes from a family. There are three brothers: Javad, Ali Larijani, and also Sadegh Larijani. Sadegh Larijani, his older brother, was the head of judiciary and one of the people tipped to be the next leader. So they come from a very influential family, and he himself has been extremely influential, and one who potentially could navigate post-war kind of leadership crisis in Iran by bringing the consensus among very different factions who otherwise might have clashed in terms of their perspective and view on how Iran has to proceed after this war ended, assuming that Islamic Republic stands at the end of this war.
Now, I want to use this opportunity just briefly to remind our viewers on YouTube and on TikTok, do put your questions in the comments. If you have questions for Kamran Matin, do it now, and I'll put these questions straight to him.
Kamran, thank you so much for bringing up that aspect of how well connected and how one could maybe assume that he is from the elite of Iranian society, and what his death basically means. I mean, just based on that, I would ask, does that mean that given that it's going to be hard to replace him, are we set for internal power struggles within the Iranian regime to determine who gets to eventually replace him?
That is very likely, although not necessarily while the war is going on, because as you can imagine, a state at war, usually different elements come together, because all the elements, despite whatever disagreements might have, they know that the fall of the regime will mean the fall of all of them. So for the time being, I think there is some sort of consensus or rallying around protecting the Islamic Republic. But once the dust has settled and the war is over, I think there will be a lot of clashes and conflict and difference of opinions. I mean, even Mojtaba Khamenei's appointment was apparently opposed by people like Pezeshkian, the president, and even Ali Larijani himself, who was reportedly in favor of his brother Sadegh Larijani, who was an Ayatollah. So theologically speaking, he was more qualified to become the leader than Mojtaba, who is a lower ranking cleric within the Shia system of hierarchy, religious hierarchy. So yeah, as I say, I think in the kind of conflict you are referring to is more likely to happen after the war rather than in the course of the war.
And I believe, Gerhard, do you have any questions that from the community that they're appearing?
Not right now for Kamran.
I just wanted to get your take on another question then, Professor Matin. How will Iranians react to this, or how are they reacting to this, or is it too early to tell right now?
Well, I can imagine that Iranians would react along the lines of their perspective on the Islamic Republic. So majority would be very happy to see his demise, not least because reports which were published in social media at least suggest that Ali Larijani was the person who designed and led actually the crackdown on protesters back in January, in which thousands, by some accounts, more than 20,000 protesters were killed. So I think most Iranians who are opposing the Islamic Republic will be obviously happy seeing him killed, but those who support the regime or at least are not actively on the opposition may have a different opinion. But especially Larijani being, having a long history in IRGC is particularly disliked by many people who dislike Islamic Republic in general anyways.
It's not just Ali Larijani whom Israel is claiming to have eliminated. It's also the head of the Revolutionary Guards Basij militia, General Ghulam Reza Soleimani. Now, the Basij militia, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Matin, is basically a militia that was used by the Iranian regime, or is used by the Iranian regime, to crack down on internal protests. We've seen this militia out on bikes and on foot, trying to control protesters and trying to tone down any protests against the regime. How significant is the death of General Ghulam Reza Soleimani, if indeed that is what has happened?
That's also, excuse me, that's also very important. I mean, Basij is a very peculiar organization in the system of Islamic Republic. It numbers in around 1 million members. They are not full-time military officers in the way IRGC members are, but they are often armed. They are organized in neighborhoods, in mosques, and offices related to IRGC, and they are called upon in times of crisis. Often, sometimes even civilian, outfit and so on. So they are actually at the forefront of dealing with internal unrest and protests and uprisings. So, having its commander eliminated surely is a big blow to them. But I do think that he and military commanders can be replaced by people lower than them. But what matters is that those more junior or younger commanders who come up in the ranks do not have the same level of experience. They do not have the kind of connections and strategic vision which the older and more senior commanders have gathered over the years. So this is also an important blow to IRGC and the regime.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Kamran Matin from the University of Sussex, thanks so much for making the time. Of course, this is not the end of the analysis when it comes to the potential death of Ali Larijani. But then thanks so much for your insights, Kamran.
Thank you.
Helps to put things into perspective for us. And of course, at the core of all of this is Iran's retaliation. What happens to Iran's retaliation? Will it be able to continue? Kamran there was talking about a mosaic strategy of decentralized commands that can still respond. But then this retaliation, if we talk about, throughout this war, basically can be best described as asymmetric, essentially using unconventional tactics to counter overwhelming military power of the United States and Israel. And we're talking about tactics such as using drones and missiles to overwhelm air defenses, targeting shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, using cyber warfare to target the West. I mean, the response covers a very, very wide gamut. And you're looking at some of those images of that kind of response. You're looking at Iranian air attacks against targets this is in Baghdad, in Iraq. But then remember, other Gulf nations have also been attacked over the past 3 weeks in terms of Iran's retaliation using drones, missiles, and also at sea, at the Strait of Hormuz. We were talking about that yesterday.
Pinpricks all over the place.
Pinpricks, right? and they don't bleed you out immediately, but they do cause a bit of discomfort. Let's talk more about that with military analyst Marina Miron, who joins us right now. Marina, how would you assess Iran's retaliatory campaign so far? Gerhard was talking about these pinprick type attacks. Are they causing enough discomfort for the Americans and the Israelis to potentially reconsider their attack strategies?
Good day. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent one. How do we actually assess the current situation, and is Iran indeed winning in a sense? And there are opinions amongst Western analysts as well that the fact that the United States is asking NATO allies, China, Japan, South Korea, to help, especially with escorts in the Strait of Hormuz, does show that the blitzkrieg operation that has been underway hasn't exactly managed to generate the desired strategic outcomes for both Israel and the United States. In other words, despite the fact that Iran has inferior military capabilities and would have absolutely no chance if it was fighting the US and Israel in regular terms, however, as you said previously, in quote-unquote asymmetric terms, Iran has been doing quite a lot of damage. And the idea here is very simple. This idea is as old as warfare itself, is basically exploiting the weaknesses of your adversary through whatever means you have at your disposal. And so we have sort of a David Goliath moment here, where the political will of the United States, Israel less so perhaps, but of the United States, is not unlimited. The financial capabilities and international pressure, and of course the discontent amongst US Middle Eastern allies. And so what we're seeing here is that it's not military damage that Iran seeks to generate, but the pressure on the Trump administration and to a lesser extent on the Netanyahu administration to give up this war, or maybe to draw them in even more to create more financial and political damage, because as the new Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei said, Iran is prepared for a long war.
Part of this asymmetric strategy is, of course, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It's part of the economic warfare with the oil price going up. The prices for energy going up. How does Iran actually effectively control it?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that if we look at this approach, at the overall strategy, the Strait of Hormuz is one piece of a broader system. So you're trying to exert pressure across different axes, and this is the most visible one, perhaps. How does Iran control it? Well, we have heard reports that the Iranian Navy is completely obliterated, but what we have to remember is the geography and how narrow the Strait of Hormuz is. And also the fact that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps also has naval capabilities. And in order to control that very narrow strait, 21 miles is it in width? So about 32 kilometers, something along the lines, is not very difficult for Iran because you don't need a navy to complicate things, and you don't even need to lay mines.
Right.
For instance, the Revolutionary Guard has drones, not just the unmanned aerial vehicles, but also subsea vehicles, gunboats also could be used, missiles from the shore, but you don't need to use them all. Just using a swarm of drones would be enough. And I'm not even mentioning the we don't know if the submarines that the Revolutionary Guard have
Right.
also been destroyed. They have, for instance, Gadir and Fateh submarines, which could create problems for any unfriendly, from Iranian perspective, vessel trying to get through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's quite cheap for the Iranians to do that.
Right. Can I draw you in on some of the questions that are coming in the chat, at least on YouTube? I mean, there's it goes back to the point that you were making about the costs for the United States and whether they can carry on. Study Ireland user saying Iran has no choice. Can the US afford to continue? Because before the attack, 22 states are in recession. I don't know if they are, but that's what the user is saying. Private debt approaching 150% of GDP. Employment and productivity is down. So basically going at the heart of the domestic situation in the United States. And let me just add something else to that in terms of the economic cost of the war, because you're talking about Iran's asymmetric warfare in which it is shooting $20,000 worth of drones, and the US and its Gulf and Israeli allies are using $4 million worth missiles to shoot these $20,000 drones down. I mean, the maths wouldn't seem to add up in terms of shooting down drones and also from the side of the US, as our user was mentioning there. Would you want to take these things up, take them on?
Yeah, sure. And it is very cheap for Iran because each drone, let's say, costs about $20,000, right? To defend against them, let's assume you use air defenses, and we have seen that being done or having been done in Ukraine, and quickly the Ukrainians realized that you cannot go on using missiles against drones. You were talking about $4 million per missile. That's Patriot PAC-3. Right?
Yeah,
that's approximately the cost. But now you also have to bear in mind that normally you would use 2 interceptor missiles per target, meaning that for a $20,000 drone, you would use $8 million. And the cost doesn't add up. It's not just the cost. We talked about the economic situation, and we also need to talk about the fact that the production costs as a result are rising. So can you actually, or can the United States afford to replenish the stocks of PAC-3 interceptors within the time limits that it has? And the question is probably not. Also, the price.
Marina, I would like to. Sorry for interrupting, because we have a bit of trouble with your audio line there. I would like to bring in another user question from Barty coming via YouTube. He's asking, where does Iran get their drones and missiles from? Because he assumes production facilities were priority targets for the airstrikes from the US. What about the production capacity for drones and maybe the reserves Iran still has?
Well, we know about the destruction mostly from Western sources, correct? And so a lot of the information that is being shown is probably laced with what I call the fog of war. And realistically, we don't know what capacities Iran still has. What I know is that Iran has a huge subterranean system where it can produce and store drones. I recall, whether they have been destroyed or whether they are still being reserved for some other purpose along the way, we don't know. So I assume that making those drones wouldn't be a problem in those subterranean factories. Also, we know that not all vessels are being attacked. So in other words, there are some vessels coming through the strait, some cargo planes from countries like China are also have also been landing in Iran. Therefore, specific components might be imported at the time being. This is just me creating hypotheticals. I don't know for sure, and therefore we can assume that Iran still has the capability to both manufacture drones and the capability to deploy a large number of drones.
We're talking about asymmetric warfare on the part of Iran. We've discussed the drones. And there is some other aspect that was, I think, very relevant, at least before this war began. That was about Iran's regional proxies. We're talking about the Houthis. We're talking about the militias in Iraq, and then Hezbollah. How would you assess that capability at the moment? Is that capability severely degraded, or can Iran actually hit back using whatever of these proxies still remain?
Well, what we're seeing now, Israel is trying to take on the Hezbollah proxy in Lebanon. Of course, some of them have been weakened, specifically Hezbollah, specifically also because Iran has lost a vital logistical route through Syria. Now, that doesn't mean that Iran doesn't have any regional proxies. On the one hand, there are also proxies in Iraq. Actually, these proxies have been recruited specifically for naval operations. I believe they were set up in 2016. The Houthis, we see that Iran might be reserving their use for later on because you don't want to waste everything you have from the very beginning. And therefore, you have those regional allies that don't, or proxies that don't need to have super military capabilities in order to create trouble. That's the first one. And the second one, you also have to understand that there will be sympathizer groups which might not have been aligned with Iran from the get-go, but seeing what is happening. And we know that the US has made itself quite unpopular among such smaller groups in the Middle East after the Iraqi campaign specifically. There are groups in Iraq, many groups in Iraq, that might take up the cause and say, well, even if we're not Iranian allies, we don't like these guys here. And so we're going to do whatever it takes to make it as painful for the Americans as it is. And in Iraq, already at the governmental level, the security cooperation with the United States was up for debate. So this is quite a serious issue. And so we don't know how many of those groups are across the Middle East. And not just the Middle East, there are also other countries like Latin America.
We'll leave it there for the moment. I know that you have a deadline. You need to be somewhere else. But thanks for making the time. Marina Miron, a military analyst from King's College in London. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marina.
For taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're talking about asymmetric warfare and how Iran has been fighting back. And another element of that is the cyber domain, at least it appears to be, if news reports are to be believed, because there have been reports of Iranian-backed cyber attacks against Albanian lawmakers, a US medical company, and a Polish nuclear research center, an attack that was foiled. Apologies for bringing this graphic up. It's a little ahead of time, but then this is basically a list of the various cyber groups that are involved with potentially responding and retaliating against the joint attacks that they are facing. So the cyber hacking groups range from outright Iranian intelligence units to proxy hackers that are working in their support to ideologically sympathetic collectives. There's pro-Iranian proxies, nominally independent groups with some loose connections to the Iranian government. One such group is Cyber Avengers, who claim responsibility for the 2023 attacks against water facilities in the US and Israel. And, well, that's the other kinds of proxies and state-linked groups that we are talking about. We'll try and post that link, that list in the chat so you can go over it at leisure. But then let's bring in Joseph Rooke. He's a cybersecurity analyst and a director of risk insights at the cyber intelligence firm Recorded Future. He joins us now on the line. Joseph, thanks so much for making the time. Should I be calling you Joseph or is it Joe? I'm not really quite sure. I know that you also do go by Joe.
You can call me Joe, no problem at all. It's great to be here. Thank you.
I'll call you Joe. Joe, thanks for making the time. Has Iran actually started attacking the West in cyberspace, or are all of those reports just, I don't know, conjecture? Do you know anything more than we do?
So some of these reports are being verified. For example, the Stryker medical device attack by Handler hack team, which you covered just there. So there is increasingly reports that some of these attacks are happening. There's been other reports, such as the Jordanian critical national infrastructure targeted. But look, I would sort of say this, and you summarized it really well there. You can bucket Iranian operations into three areas. So one is espionage, and for obvious reasons, right? They're heavily sanctioned. They want to understand how to improve their economies, their technology. So espionage is one. Another one is destructive attacks. And we've seen that famously with the likes of Saudi Aramco being targeted with Shamoon wiper malware. And the other one is monitoring dissidents. And so, but what you are now seeing, of course, is increasingly going to be that pivot into destructive retaliation, which is now what we're reporting.
I mean, help me understand this, because this attack on Stryker, for example, let's focus on that. That's a medical manufacturing company based in the United States, and I think that attack was reported last week, if I'm not wrong. What I don't understand is why would Iran, in the middle of a war, target a medical manufacturing company in the United States? I mean, surely the targets would potentially be US and Israeli air defense systems or network operations, right?
Yeah, so the way to look at this as well, it's so remember, they're up against the most capable cyber power, the US. I think just about everybody ranks them up there as number one, with China sort of closing in close behind them. And Iran is often categorized as sort of a mid to high tier cyber power, if you want to simplify it that way. But it's got a lot of intent. So so what it's trying to do is hurt where it can. So the reason that it's almost certainly not having success with some of these critical systems in the US is, again, the US is extremely good at its defense, you'd argue, given its budgets, given its focus and preparation for this. So where is it targeting? It's targeting manufacturing. And by the way, manufacturing is heavily hit over and over again. It is a way to hurt an economy. It's a way to hurt multiple people. It's a way to hurt supply chains. And obviously, in this case, this group found a way to do this to this organization you just mentioned.
And how effective would you say these operations are proving at, I don't know, diminishing the warfighting capacity of the United States and Israel, or is this so peripheral as to have almost negligible impact on the outcome of the war?
It keeps Iran fresh in people's minds as an aggressor, as someone who can hit back. We should not underestimate Iranian capabilities here, and they're reminding us of this. One of the reasons that we've probably not seen more attacks is that the internet in Iran is down, and there's a debate happening whether that's because of a cyber attack by the Israelis and the US, or whether that's because they've shut down their internet in order to quell any rebellion internally. It is probably a mixture of both here, but that's making their operations very difficult to conduct. And what I would just say to everyone is, in the past, we've seen cyber operations from Iran emerge a couple of months after a major incident. It hasn't happened immediately. So we should definitely be on heightened alert. And these sorts of attacks by Handler Group that we just described here are a reminder to us that they have that intent.
So, see, it was interesting because I did want to ask you about the internet being down in Iran, if that is solely because of the Iranian regime or because of cyber attacks. But can you talk a bit about the counterattacks from the United States and Israel? And I don't know if there are other countries helping them in those operations. Can you talk a bit about those operations? Because surely there must be certain cyber warfare operations being conducted by the Israelis and the Americans, right?
I think it's safe to say no modern conflict, certainly if you want to win, is not going to involve some form of cyber operation. And the US has been very clear. It's been very open. If you've watched their briefings, the Pentagon saying that cyber operations and space operations have accompanied kinetic warfare, not just this time, but also in Venezuela and also previously in Iran, potentially taking out its missile defense systems. And the words that the US have used, I'm probably quoting this slightly off, but it's along the lines of, we've created a corridor. And I think that makes total sense. So what could that translate to? Well, absolutely taking out the internet, targeting missile defense systems, creating confusion. And the Israelis, it's been reported now that they were able to hack into the cameras across the whole of Iran almost, by the looks of it, in order to identify where specific people were and in order to cause maximum damage with their kinetic operations. So this is how modern warfare is fought. If you do not have cyber or space capabilities, you're almost certainly not going to win a modern conflict.
I mean, Iran is up there with actors like North Korea and the Chinese when it comes to hacking. I don't know if the capability is the same. But then help me understand this. And it's a very rookie question. I am not a hacker. I do not know much about this field. Therefore, we have you as an expert. But just as a very basic question, why are the Americans so good? Why are they able to? How are they able to defend infrastructure and carry out attacks in a way that the Iranians cannot? Because surely there must be, I don't know, some clever people in Iran who can do the same things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will answer this. So let's go back to the sort of the graph that a lot of organizations use, including us. So this is on the x-axis, your capability, and on the y, your intent. Okay, so what does that mean? It means, well, how much resourcing do you have? And so budgets, right? The US has an enormous defense budget. That helps. It is also a pioneer in technology. It is not crippled by sanctions. That helps. And then its intent. The US understands very clearly that if it does, as I said before, wants to have maximum effect, maximum impact on its adversaries in a conflict, then absolutely you need to have these capabilities to help you. And they've been open about that. Why wouldn't you? So the Iranians have struggled certainly on the capability front, but I say this again, certainly not on the intent front. They're very motivated, especially now, and that is why we need to be on heightened alert.
I just want to remind our viewers, sorry for interrupting, but remind our viewers, if you have any questions for Joe on the cyber and intelligence side of this, please post them in the chat while we still have Joe on, and I can pass them on.
And just to sort of let our viewers know that the earlier, let's just say, malformations with the way this chat was appearing, the live that we're doing with you, Joe, you did not see this, but the way it was appearing on the screen is a technology question. I'm certain that we were not hacked by anybody while we were having this conversation. But just in terms of cyber hacking and delving slightly deeper into that, how do you see this panning out? Do you see, as you were mentioning earlier, whenever this war ends, Iran potentially mounting more cyber attacks then, as they have done in the past? Or do you see their cyber attacks potentially changing as this war progresses?
Yeah, so, I mean, this can go kind of two ways if I'm, again, simplifying it. And within each way it goes, there's lots of then mini scenarios. But either the regime falls or the regime survives. Now, let's assume it survives in some capacity. We could see a few things. We could see very open attacks, cyber attacks, saying it was us. We don't care if you want to attribute it. It was us, and that causes a degree of fear, which may be an objective. But something else that I really do want to highlight, and we've been monitoring quite a bit at Recorded Future, is how a lot of nations are now using cybercrime as a smokescreen. And the Iranians have done this. This has been reported multiple times, and places like Albania, in Israel. What do I mean by that? It means that it's a nation, state-backed group hacks a company, but it looks like it's ransomware. So for those of you watching who don't know what ransomware is, it's where all the systems are wiped and a message pops up on your computer that says you've got to pay us in Bitcoin, to get everything unlocked. It's incredibly destructive. Now, what we are seeing is a lot of countries, including Iran, using this pseudo ransomware to hide their operations, right? So that means that it's very difficult for, say, Israel to point a finger and say, hey, that was you, because the Iranians will say, well, no, it was a cyber criminal, but actually it was them potentially, right? So to answer your question here, your question was, where does this go? Well, let's assume the regime survives. We're either going to see, simply put, very much destructive attacks, say, hey, it was us, don't care, trying to cause as much damage as possible, or you're going to see these, these what we say obfuscated attacks, these pseudo ransomware attacks where it's not very clear who's behind it. That's my assessment right now.
Can I, Joe, pass on two viewer questions actually coming in via TikTok? One from Miss Ras, that is how AI might be used in cyber attacks, and one from Eddie. User Eddie wants to know whether you have any indication that Russia is providing cyber support and or intelligence for that.
So I'll answer the last one first. We certainly have no indication that there's direct cooperation happening between Iran and Russia from a cyber angle. There have been reports, though, more broadly, this is public, of course, that Iran has been supplied with some intelligence from Russia in order to strike its targets more effectively. We can assume that there could be some overlap when it comes to cyber attacks, but again, no confirmation on that. That is a guess, hopefully a well-founded guess based on what we're seeing. The previous question, the first question around how AI is being used, we've released a public report exactly on this about a year ago, in fact, saying how Iran was planning to use AI more broadly in its military and cyber operations strategy. And at high level, how can they use that, and how we're seeing a lot of countries use it. A good example is this. In the past, if I wanted to get into your network, into your system, I'd send you an email, it's a phishing email, right? And you would probably see spelling mistakes there. Gives away that it's not real. Now, actors are using AI to make that a really clean email, make it more applicable to your organization. That's what we call social engineering or enhanced social engineering. That is one way that we're seeing, but there are other effective means. And one that I would not discount Iran starting to do, and this is the final thing I'll say, is the use of AI with the deep fakes. And we're seeing, for example, we've written about North Korea doing this, where you're interviewing someone, you think it's them. I promise this is me right now. I'm not a deep
thank God, I was going to ask you that.
And actually, it's not them. It's someone else, and then you trust them, you hire them, they're in your network. So these are the sorts of things now we're seeing used by nation-state actors.
I'm glad you answered those questions, because those are exactly the similar kind of questions that were being asked on our YouTube chat as well from user Merca Dotesne. I'm pronouncing this all wrong, and from user Tap. I'm hoping that has answered their questions. One final question for you, Joe. Do you see any difference in the way cyber attacks are being carried out in this war, or do they follow a similar pattern that we've seen in other wars? Is there something about this war that stands out for you?
I'll be upfront, they're following similar patterns. And again, sorry to plug our State of Security report here, but we absolutely cover this in our annual report, State of Security Report 2026. It is, for me, what's really interesting is the playbook of using what we call hacktivists, so loosely affiliated groups that may not even be in Iran, but sympathize with the regime, conducting attacks on behalf of the government as the government is struggling, probably partly to defend its networks. Remember, it's probably had a lot of cyber attacks coming at it, so resources are focused on defense. But to answer your question, is this really different to what we've seen elsewhere? Right now, no, is the short answer. It is absolutely pretty much every conflict that you're seeing, and it has some form of cyber angle to it. It's just a case of how much and how destructive it is.
Thanks so much for that, Joe. I think we'll go and read that cybersecurity report that you guys came out with 1 year back and maybe post the link in the chat. But thanks so much for joining us, Joe, cybersecurity analyst and director of risk insights at the cyber intelligence firm Recorded Future. Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
And here's a quick recap of some of the most important developments in the US and Israeli war against Iran. Israel says Iran's security chief, Ali Larijani, has been killed in a targeted airstrike in Tehran. Larijani was a former nuclear negotiator and a close ally of former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed in an airstrike at the start of the war.
And the US embassy in the Iraqi capital Baghdad has come under attack again by rockets and drones. At least one of the drones crashed outside the complex. Iraqi security forces described it as the most intense assault since the start of the war. No injuries, although, were reported.
And oil prices were up in a Tuesday trading after a number of countries pushed back against US President Donald Trump's demand that allies help secure the vital Strait of Hormuz oil shipping route. And that's it for this live stream. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us on YouTube and TikTok. Thanks for sending in your comments and questions.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.